I think we're anxious to go ahead and get started, so if we could invite our staff to the front, anyone who's presenting and/or responding to particular questions, we'd invite you to come forward. So just as a reminder, and I pulled my notes because I don't typically lead these discussions, so I wanted to make sure I was in order so I wouldn't get a detention from our coaches. I wanted to just remind us before we start monitoring to ask a few key questions. Does the report clearly show what is being monitored, which specific policy, goal, interpretation, et cetera? And I believe it does. Does it clearly show data for the 3 previous reporting periods? Does. Does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of performance? It does. And then finally, does it clearly have supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation? Some of that's included, but some of that obviously will be referenced as we get through our questions. So with that,
if I could interrupt, the one thing I would note on the writing of the goal statement is we typically should have a starting point, and we do not have a starting, or we have a starting point of 17%, but we don't have a starting date. So that would just be one thing I notice on this goal statement. Should have a starting date, ending date, starting point, ending point.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Appreciate it. So I will open up the floor to the board to proceed through our progress monitoring of Black Male Algebra Part 3. Who'd like to hop in with first question? Yes.
I'm sorry, can I just introduce real quick? I don't know if you've actually met Taylor Corley, our Director of Teaching and Learning for Secondary, who's been kind of with us employed virtually for the last couple of months, but she is here now and all moved in or getting moved in?
Getting moved in.
Getting moved in.
Yeah.
But, I think you may know her about Mary Grinstead, Tim Schott, and Mike Vukovic.
So Mary, you're coming to us from, is it Mary?
Taylor.
Taylor, you're coming to us from?
Indianapolis Public Schools.
Oh, awesome.
Yep.
And is there a Des Moines connection, or
I
you
grew
just
up-
loved us so much that you just thought, I've got to be there?
Yeah, I grew up in Windsor Heights.
Oh.
So I'm returning home after 15 years away.
Awesome. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We'll try to go easy on you tonight.
Thank you.
But this is the only time that'll happen,
Okay.
so, okay. All right, so who'd like to hop in with the first question?
So I probably should have talked to my board colleagues about this, but I'm just going to take some notes during this. I don't know if anyone else finds it challenging. Like, I feel like sometimes we have the same conversations over and over again. And so to take some notes with some of those clearly defined action steps that AJ kind of called out at our last meeting, like, what are you going to do? What are the barriers? Just so we're all on the same page and easily have it to refer back to for future monitoring. So I'm happy to share that with the board, if that's helpful, with you, Matt, if that's helpful, just so that it feels like we're having like an ongoing dialogue and building off of these conversations.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's really helpful, Jenna. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
especially
Jenna.
when we have multi-part reports. Sometimes you forget, right? Yeah, yeah. So I appreciate that offer, and we will kindly accept, and yes, please share your notes. So yes, who would like to hop in?
And looking at the data on page 1, our 8.3% is our current percent of Black male students earning a B or higher in Algebra 1 at the end of 9th grade. This is down significantly. Can you help us understand what isn't working? And if there is anything working, what is that?
Sure. So the significant drop is mostly attributed to a lack of systems built from my office, meaning that the 9th grade algebra report is, while it is a reflection of students' knowledge, can you not hear that?
No.
How about now?
There you go.
While it is a 9th grade algebra report, it's also and mostly a reflection of student skills and knowledge developed prior to 9th grade, leading up to the 9th grade. And so what we are seeing right now is a lack of a system that I failed to build in the grades preceding that. So you'll see a progression of, if you look at the the progress measures from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Those interim progress measures, you'll even see sort of a decrease from 6th to 7th to 8th grade, and then it's manifesting itself in 9th grade right now in the algebra report. The reason why I say it's compounded is I actually debated about whether or not to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, only but we've heard it a lot. The pandemic compounded the skills deficit, and the system that I built didn't actually attribute for that. And so it manifested itself in this report, and you see a huge decrease.
Matt, what is or team, is the status of the curriculum implementation? And just so people know, I'm referring to your analysis on page 1,
Mhm.
where you identified 4 systems that need to be addressed. And so curriculum implementation was one of them.
It is, yeah. So we're the second year of implementation for IM. If I were gonna pick a success out of this report, there's really not a lot to celebrate in terms right now of this report. If I were to choose one, it would be the mid-year adjustment of our curriculum team and the pacing of the curriculum implementation. So the last time I think we got together around this table, we talked a little bit about making some adaptations or some adjustments to that curriculum pacing to account for the skills deficit that was manifesting itself, but also just the sheer pace of the curriculum. And so we scaled that back in the second semester to make that adjustment. And that's partially why you see some improvements from semester 1, number of students earning A's and B's, or black males earning A's and B's, to semester 2. There is an increase from semester 1 to semester 2. It's partly attributed to that curriculum adjustment.
Just to follow up, not to get too in the weeds. In the same vein, it says teachers are holding students to grade level standards. So grade level standards were still covered over the 2 years for 9th grade algebra. You just slowed it down?
Yes, yeah. So, okay, thank you for that question. What that's referencing is, in this particular goal, it's based on, obviously, on grade distribution. And so what's important is that we are tightly calibrated around what's an A, what's a B, not only from classroom to classroom, but from school to school. And what we see in the results is a low distribution of grades of A's and B's in that 8.3%. And we're seeing that consistently from school to school. There was, we held the standard in terms of the grade level standard. What we didn't do was build the skills necessary for students in the scaffolding within the classroom for students to reach standard of mastery. And again, that's not a teacher's issue. That's a systems issue that begins and ends with my office. So you have 9th grade teachers, for example, having to catch up a significant amount of skills deficit over the course of one semester, and then of course over the second semester in that 1 year.
What was it that did work for that one school?
Thank you. That one school was virtual. So of the 6 schools, now virtual being an accredited school, what worked was the students, their environment worked for them. Mike or Tim or Mary, do you have anything? That's a very generic answer. And so I'm wondering if you have maybe a more specific answer that maybe John Mendoza may have offered. We can investigate that further. It's a very small population of students served, relatively speaking. Do you remember the end size of that, Mary?
No.
That's okay. Right.
So just as a follow-up to that, if we had one of our 6 comprehensive high schools meeting their target, and the data only reflects 19 of the 228 Black males, do we assume that the high school that actually met target represents a small percentage of those 19?
It's, they would represent less than 10 of that 19, definitely.
Okay,
Because we know the majority of our Black male ninth graders are at North and Roosevelt. Yeah, within like
okay,
30 seconds of getting on my computer, I could tell you, but off
Okay.
the tip of my tongue, I can't tell you.
not a problem. You know, and I'm not for sure if this is the appropriate sequencing for this particular question, but when we think about the universe of Black males eligible versus the number that are actually participating, I think my question really goes to what contributes to the lack of participation? What contributes to the lack of the numbers being higher for Black males?
Terry, to be clear, Madam Chair, what is the total of, there's 228, and then what is our total number?
19,
Sorry.
the bottom.
Is the question though that you're asking
Yeah, what,
total eligible?
yeah, what is contributing to the lack of Black males not participating, not enrolling in?
So then what's our total is more than 228. Our total is, isn't it?
It
Black?
says here, no, it says, if I'm reading this correctly, this data represents 19 Black male students across the district who enrolled in Algebra 1 and averaged a B or higher across both semesters of Algebra 1 among all 228 Black male ninth grade students.
But there's got, I mean, I could be wrong. There's more Black male ninth graders. There's than 228.
The 19 is the 8.3%.
Yeah.
Right,
19 of 228.
District-wide, we had 228 Black male ninth graders this year.
Is that right?
Is that, so that's across the district, or is that
That's
That's
across
the
across
number
Across the
of
district.
Black male or Black male students that enrolled in algebra?
That's across.
across
That's
the
across the
district, the
district.
total number.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I apologize for,
It's
because I
okay.
had it wrong.
No, that's okay.
Thanks.
I'm glad you challenged that because I want to make sure that we're reflecting on the right number. So that just feels like a really low percentage. So, and especially if we're utilizing Black male algebra as an indicator of success overall. And if we only have 8.3% of the pool that is even considering taking the class.
I don't think that's right.
Oh,
So.
I'm sorry, you're right. 8.3% who are successful.
Yeah.
But
An ARB, yes.
right, but only 19 of the 228 who actually got a B or higher. That's correct?
In both
Right.
semesters. Yes, ma'am.
So what's the total pool of the 228 that are in Algebra 1?
81%.
So we-
Page 2.
So we have
Okay.
a internal for us breakdown. Do you want to read it, Matt? or you
No,
want
go
me to
ahead.
read it? Okay, so of the 228 Black males that finished the school year with us, 17.5% of those didn't enroll in Algebra 1 at all. So they didn't even take either semester of the course. Another, on top of that, another 26.8% enrolled in semester 1, but then did not enroll for semester 2. So they didn't persist through the course.
Okay,
Another 16.7% averaged a D between both semesters. And then another 23.7% averaged a C across both semesters. And then that leaves that 8.3%
okay.
with A or B.
Did I miss those numbers in the report? I'm sorry if I did.
No, they're not in the
They're not in
report.
The,
Okay.
yeah, it's just
Thank
that progress measure 1 just speaks of it's a percentage, 80, that 81% that's enrolled. Access, if you will.
Thank you. Other board questions?
So kind of going back to that, we have, and I just want to make sure I understand this. So on the top of page 2, we know, again, you read the numbers to us, Mary, of those that enrolled, but, roughly 84% in semester 1, 80% in semester 2. But we're not getting them across the finish line. Is it all attributed to the scaffolding or through the, trying to pull your words out here, but curriculum pacing? Or are there other barriers or limitations that are causing, or that should be reflected in what's happening with the students, and how can we get them across that finish line to be successful? That's a how question, but what is happening with them to cause them not to be successful crossing that finish line?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked a little bit about the pacing of the curriculum. So we made the adjustment after semester 1 for semester 2. There's also just the dynamic of ninth grade transitioning. And so moving from 8th grade into ninth grade in and of itself creates some challenges for students that we haven't solved that yet. That's an opportunity for us moving forward into FY23 that we've got some plans for, but just that change in environment from going from a school of 700 to a school potentially of 2,700 or 1,000. There's a difference in that, and going from just the level of coursework, the rigor of coursework from 8th grade to ninth grade is also pretty significant. In algebra specifically, we're talking about going from 8th grade math of around foundational concrete skills into some conceptual math and abstract math. And again, those are the skills that again, my failure to build that system 6th through 8th grade is manifesting itself right now, or it had in this ninth grade season.
So you say that, but then our 8th grade data is not high. I mean, we're at 13% in our spring actuals for our 8th grade Black males, up from 8% at the beginning of the year. So
That's actually, maybe I'm not saying it right. That's proving my point in the idea. The foundational skills from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade are actually on the decline and not on the rise. And
oh, I
so,
thought you were talking about the transition, like we're losing them from 8th to 9th. So you're saying that's not the issue. You're just saying.
correct.
6 to 8.
Yeah,
6 to
6 to 8.
8.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Yep. Sorry about that.
Other board questions?
Maybe half.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
It seems, not to make comparisons to a prior monitoring report, but it seems with, I believe, literacy, the team, you had a crystal clear path on stay the course, dig in, and some very tangible steps that you felt
Very much so.
would build, come to fruition. I think the question is, when you look at the target population of 228, and that number may vary, how do you know this is the right continued course of action?
Yeah, I don't know that it's it's the right continued course of action. There's 2 additional strategies that we need to deploy. One being the personalized plans for students and an insurance that is taking place specifically for our Black males. But then also is we have to do a better job as an organization investigating intervention systems, not just in ninth grade, but K-9. You could argue K-12 for sure, but as we're talking about the foundational skills and the skills needed to actually be proficient and master those skills in ninth grade algebra, we need to do that K-9. Right now, our intervention system is not universal. It's dependent upon the school.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. So you say our intervention system is not universal. It's dependent upon the school. Can you help me understand that a little bit?
Yeah, so
Good.
right now it's school-based, meaning that schools, if they have an academic interventionist because they're a title school, then they offer some intervention in that regard. Or if they've got, what we do have universally is that it's scheduled at the high school level. We have intervention time, if you will, that's scheduled out. But it's not necessarily based on a skill set or a lack thereof, that we are building universal interventions on skill deficits. It's just dependent upon what's happening uniquely in that classroom or in that building. It's nothing that we've done as an organization, as a system to build that out. Yeah. What would you add to that? What did I miss about that?
This is going to sound harsh, but this is not a new goal. This is something that we've been working at for multiple years now. So what has caused us to have the lack of systems and the lack of scaffolding and on behalf of our Black males?
Lack of focus and leadership from me, from my office. So there will be some things that change moving forward, but that's my ownership on that. The same level of focus and intensity that we had at the elementary level for the literacy, we have not had at the secondary level. That falls on me.
Matt, can you talk a little bit, going back to the systems that need to be worked on? District collaboration, what does that look like currently?
Mhm.
And how is that going to be different?
So up until a couple of weeks ago, that collaborative effort around improving algebra was solely the conversation, if you will, in leadership and learning and at the school. Now that conversation is actually happening district-wide in all departments, and all departments being a part of that conversation around how are we resourcing this goal? How are we actually hiring for this goal? How are we actually creating the spaces and places in the schools and in the district offices to support this goal? So it's a district level goal where every department is responsible for that and contributing to that goal and us achieving that goal. So that's what it looks like now and moving forward. Is that helpful?
Yes.
But I'm sorry. And most of that was because, again, it was seen as an academic goal that other departments didn't necessarily need to enter into. And all of that collaborative effort is changing, and where folks are finding themselves and entering into that space. And that conversation is through their lens and through their unique contributions from the district or from the school-based positions that they are serving in. Examples of that will be in talking to our custodial staff at the end of the school year and having that conversation with Brian and his team and Dave Berger, having conversations scheduled up with food and nutrition around what does this goal mean for them in that regard, and how we're actually serving students and contributing to us achieving this goal, and how we all actually celebrate in our student success. And that's where the opportunity for us to actually unite as an organization and as a district under these goals, as opposed to seeing the goals as something that only academics is responsible for.
Thank you.
So I'm just did some quick math over here and was just thinking, wow, 23.7% of our Black males got a C. And if we had added that to our 8.3% that got a B plus, we'd be sitting at 34% right now, right? So what additionally could have been done, or what was done to try to move our Cs to our Bs? What was done to try to make us get closer to that 35% goal?
Nothing was done universally. Individual schools had plans around that. We visited the school as an executive team a week or two ago and listened to this principal speak about the efforts made based on seeing that attendance data and then looking at the C data and having a personalized plan for each student to move the needle for the students within that building. That's an example of something that happened in response to that data. What we didn't do, where the opportunity is moving forward, is to do that universally, is to create that sort of personalized plan and partner with our parents, with our students around what is and what is not working, and do it in a much more proactive and frequent cadence of interactions.
So that will be in place moving forward.
It will be in place moving forward.
What you spoke about attendance really quickly, sorry. And I feel like last time we were at this table, we talked about teacher attendance being a really big issue. around goal? And maybe that was from our data last year. I was just
No,
wondering
yeah,
if teacher
you're correct.
attendance played a factor, a role here at all, if we've seen
It
that
does,
improve.
it does. So, and it manifested itself mostly in the teachers covering for one another in classrooms because of the high absenteeism. There was a lot of teachers that missed out on their PLC time. There was a lot of teachers, instructional coaches that missed out on their opportunity to actually provide that instructional coaching because they were covering vacancies for their peers and for one another. So that was definitely a contributing factor to it. The sub-fill rate, if you will, improved in second semester. And so it allowed more teachers to engage in PLC time and more coaches to engage in instructional coaching learning cycles. And so that improved as the year went on, and we were able to fill more absences of staff. So yes.
So I guess since Jackie went to a how question, how do you feel about that for next year then?
One of our largest concerns right now is staffing going into next year. So we have, we're making progress in filling the vacancies that we have. But it is July 5th, and we still have some math vacancies at the secondary level specifically. And so we're problem solving, not just obviously how to actually recruit and get more teachers on this time of year, but also now it's the contingency plan. What can we do internally to provide some supports to schools? And so we're creating multiple potential solutions to that. And all of them require, to some degree or another, staff members doing something differently than what they've signed on for. And so that in and of itself creates some more challenges. Not that they're all not overcomable, but it just creates some more challenges. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but yes, it is a challenge that has not completely been alleviated.
We are going to improve focus, improve collaboration, improve personalized learning plans. How do you know what will be implemented to know that those strategies are going to work or are working mid-cycle?
Progress monitoring system. So having a system in place that lets us know on a frequent cadence of whether or not we're actually seeing the results that we were after in terms of students earning A's and B's. Those check-ins with students and with their families. That's just something that we just didn't do universally, that we will do universally moving forward. So defining what that looks like and what a success look like, sound like for that student based on his or her or their experiences and working with their families. And so that's the most relevant progress monitoring data that we can collect, and being able to actually have that data into a Tableau dashboard so that we can pull that up, not only at the building level, but the district level. One of the things that we did that worked well for us in the literacy report was to know who the students are, literally by name, by school, at the central office level as well too. So we know who we're asking for and what we're asking about when we're there. That's also an opportunity for us moving into the secondary part of the level of the school district into next year, is having those student names and knowing their unique names and their situations by school moving forward.
So I've got some tactical questions, so I apologize, team, for not being 100% strategically focused. But with regards to those absenteeisms and staff concerns and asking staff to do things that they didn't sign up for, what does that look like when the IM curriculum is, I'm going to just say robust to be broad, but not everyone, I'm guessing not everyone has received the professional development required to implement with fidelity. So what will be done to ensure that that fidelity exists? And then the other tactical question, I'm hearing system-wide requirements of our leadership. And so what will be done to hold those leaders accountable for those system-wide changes? And I'm thinking at elementary, skills block was something that we found that was working, but it's not yet a requirement for everyone. I'm hearing that it's now going to be a requirement. So Yeah, what does accountability look like?
Yeah, good question. So to your first question, we are moving towards a instructional coaching model that involves a triad, if you will, of supporting our principal, our associate principals, and our instructional coaches at the secondary level in terms of a very specific and focused implementation support. So the instructional coach will be focused at the teacher level specifically. The AP, the associate principal will be focused at the teacher team level around that PLC, and the principal obviously is focused at the organizational level in the entire building. And so what IM does provide is a rubric that allows you to know, based on your level of implementation, of how effective you are in that regard in those three areas. So our curriculum coordinators for math specific, Courtney and Isaac, will be focusing their efforts on those triads at the middle school and high school level of supporting their capacity building and their opportunities to implement with fidelity from their positions. So there's inherent in that is some accountability measures, right, in terms of us checking on the fidelity of implementation, first and foremost. What's most important is that the team at this table and myself are also accountable, obviously, to that implementation. And what does that mean for us in terms of how we're changing our behaviors, and what does that look like in our weekly cadence and our performance reviews? So if we know that that's the priority moving forward, how much time are we spending in those conversations, and how are we tracking that time and the quality of that time, both with Mike, Tim, Mary, Taylor, and myself. There should be a change in how we spend our time and where we're spending our time in that regard.
Madam Chair, may I ask for some coaching from AJ? Sure. Okay. AJ, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So I'm just in kind of collaboratively want to just ask, so when there is a report and the goal is below target and we're talking about, you've, I think, clearly identified 4 areas that you think need work, and I've kind of provided some examples of things that are going to be worked on. Can you give some coaching on the accountability mechanism? What can we ask for? So, Jenna, I think, is taking notes to try and identify some of the action steps identified by you, Superintendent, to move things forward. But what's a best practice of accountability? So 6 months from now, we look and you said within district collaboration, X was going to happen. This is the result. And reflect, maybe you nailed it or maybe you didn't, but at least I said I was going to do this and it worked. I said I was going to do this and it failed. I said I was going to do this. I didn't do it. I just am looking for a little coaching because there's a lot to this.
Yeah, so,
So
go ahead, AJ. I was just going to say, we do have the ability to request an interim report.
Mhm.
So we can change the frequency with which we receive information if we think that that's necessary. The other thing that we can do is certainly request a more specific action plan and timeline tied to that relative to the actionable steps that have been delineated this evening.
Okay.
That will take place. And then I'll defer to AJ.
yeah, so actually, Gagi, you kind of nailed it spot on. Different boards handle this different ways. Some don't do anything, which is, I think, where you all have been. Some do exactly what Jenna's doing. So kudos to you for deciding to kind of take this into your own hands and write down, okay, here are the action steps so that I'll know the next time we have this monitoring report, these are the things that I can be curious about. And some boards have assigned this to their staff. So whoever the board's administrator is keeps track of, here are the next steps that the administration is describing, so that if board members want to inquire about them at the next monitoring report, they can. The hard part about this is recognizing that the board is at no time evaluating the superintendent based on his implementation of strategies. So if he says, hey, I'm going to implement strategy A, B, and C, and then 6 months from now, he hasn't implemented A, B, or C, but students are getting closer to the goal, then that's really the only thing the board cares about. Now, if students are getting further from the goal, and the superintendent hasn't implemented any of his strategies, obviously, there's some natural inquiry that might come up in that circumstance. And so it's simultaneously completely fair game to do what Jenna's doing, is to say, hey, here's kind of what you shared. Has this worked or not? And if where it has, great. How are we doing more of it? Where it hasn't, so be it. What is your pivot been? What change in behavior? So all of that you described, Jackie, and that you're doing, Jenna, completely fair game to keep track of, and the administration, it's totally appropriate for them to be responsive to that. Especially since you are writing it down, I would 100% make sure that those are questions that are submitted in advance, so that the superintendent, comes prepared, knowing that questions that are slightly more tactical in nature, but that are directly derived from the previous monitoring report, are going to be included. That'll just let the staff be a little bit better prepared. The one other thing that I was going to highlight, your vice chair already mentioned, it is possible to increase the frequency of your monitoring. I don't think that's actually going to do anything for you in this particular case, but that usually comes into play most on the guardrail side. If there's an operational area that seems to be particularly deficient, only because guardrail data tends to be available with a much greater frequency than it's scheduled for monitoring, whereas goal data, often you're monitoring it as frequently as fresh data is available. And so then the other thing that your vice chair mentioned, the idea of the board knowing that the administration has a plan. The board always has the right to know if their chief executive has a plan. The board should not be approving the plan. The board should not be opining on the plan. The board should not be saying we like or dislike the plan. But as a inquiry, it's something very appropriate for the board to receive outside of board meetings. You just have it emailed to you. So for example, if there was a guardrail around use of technology, it's entirely appropriate to ask the superintendent, do you have a technology plan related to this? And either they do or they don't. If they don't, that's not a problem. They're not obligated to have one unless they're obligated by law. But if they do have one, then it's appropriate for you to request it and for you to be able to see it. If they don't have a plan in place for something, that's not particularly surprising. The things that the superintendent is most prioritizing, they tend to have plans around, or the things that they're legally required to have plans around, they tend to have plans around. But either way, if they do have a plan, it's entirely appropriate to see it. I would generally encourage the administration, though, to email that out to board members as part of a regular Friday packet if it's requested, and just advise board members not to get to the point where you are scrutinizing the plans heavily, because then what will happen is the administration will pivot away from focusing on accomplishing the goal and toward trying to please the board by accomplishing the plan. And at no point do you care if the superintendent's plan works. You care if student outcomes actually improved. Is that responsive to your inquiry, Jackie?
Yeah, very helpful, I think, for me. Thank you.
Other board questions?
I do have another question. On page 6, you do reference under the analysis for interpretation that students with IEPs and multilingual learners are more discrepant than peers. I think it feels like we see that, common theme, and I've seen that in the literacy data as well. But question being, so with that, what strategies do you anticipate lifting up to support those students, knowing that we're seeing just some struggles in those
Yeah,
areas?
so similar, I think we may have had a similar conversation in the literacy report around just the professional learning that needs to support teachers in special education, and our multilanguage learner teachers as well. And so including them, obviously, in this professional learning experience, similar to what I think AJ just mentioned it again. I know it's the sort of the hallmark of SOFG around the idea that student outcomes don't change until adult behavior change. And so we have to change some adult behaviors and at central office around how we're actually providing that level of support to those teachers and their professional learning experience so that they can in return and actually apply that for students. So that's the greatest opportunity for us moving forward. And it's similar in that regard with our literacy report. Can I ask, did I miss anything about that?
Well, I would just add, I looked at Taylor to see if she was going to add it, that the changes to our LEAP, to our ELL instructional program, which were referenced when we were talking about the elementary, the literacy data, also apply to the middle school specifically. And so the idea of both improving and increasing teacher skill and efficacy, but also improving access to core grade level content in the middle school years and before actually are part of those strategies that support ELL students and students with IEPs.
You talked about expanding the system and the team beyond just what's happening at high school and ninth grade, right? We know it starts much earlier. How far back are you planning on going? Is this middle? I heard you reference middle school. Are we focused on these interventions in middle school? Are we doing anything in elementary school to focus on these interventions?
Well, so to a fully built out and comprehensive universal intervention system would incorporate K-12. That takes a little bit of time. And so the priority will be work on 8th grade into 9th grade, as well as in 6, 7, 8. So we'll kind of start with the middle school level and then work our ways both out to the elementary and the high school level as well. We know that we've got obviously some incoming 8th graders that we need to have those personalized plans for, ready to go for their 9th grade and algebra experience.
Matt, going back to the analysis and the interpretation for progress measure 3, the very last point talks about investing in professional learning. What does that look like right now? And how is that going to be different?
So that's referencing right now, what it's looked at to this point is primarily focusing on those core classroom teachers and those core classroom instructors. What it will look like moving forward and what's already started is being more inclusive of our teachers that are in special education and our EL department. And so making sure that we have, we're providing the same curricular IM professional learning for teachers that are working specifically with our multilingual learners and our students with IEPs.
Can I add to that?
Please.
We are also going to focus a lot of PD with our instructional coaches. So next year, all instructional coaches will receive training on IM, but all middle schools will have 2 instructional coaches, and one of those will get some additional concentrated support that will be a part of that triad that Matt mentioned, so that it's not just the teachers in the building with the knowledge, it's also the people supporting the teachers.
So I just had a general question just around the universe. So we've already defined it as being 228. And right now, these numbers, the 8.3 represents 19 that are earning a B or higher. What steps do we need to put in place to increase the universe? If we know that algebra is a gateway to higher order work, to college preparation, to career and college readiness, what are we doing to increase the pool? Because feeling like we have only 8.3% of our Black males who are now achieving a B or higher, and a very large percentage who are either not taking, dropping out after the first semester, or earning only a C or D, in my opinion, doesn't create sort of the groundswell that we had hoped to by actually putting this goal in place to increase what is happening with our Black males. So how do we encourage, ready, prepare, do what we can to increase the pool? Because 19 of 228 who are getting a B or higher doesn't give me any hope that this goal is either the right goal or that we're even going to meet it, because we're going to have to do something pretty significant to get to what, 35% by 2024.
Yeah, I think we increased the universe by paying attention K-8 from my office. That those tiered intervention systems at the K-8 level that's where the universe actually increases. That's where we build skills and we create not just technical math skills, but that math identity, that efficacy around what it means to be a mathematician. We've gotten a really good start on what it means to be, a journalist in our literacy efforts, what it means to be someone who is a creative writer. All of those things are taking hold because of the level of focus at the elementary levels. We need that same level of engagement and leadership from myself, from my team, to build that efficacy across the system, K-8, before students get into the 9th grade for algebra. If students are having negative experiences in their math classes in those grades that precede 9th grade, there's only so much that a teacher can do in 9th grade. And so we've got to build that level of efficacy. And I know we've talked about that before, but that starts, as students are entering into our school systems and pre-K and kindergarten, and having a universal approach to that.
Can I add to that?
Please.
So, Ms. Knox, I appreciate you taking notes, because last time we sat here on the first check-in, we were at a low percentage as well, I think 13% or so. And we were asked what we were going to do moving forward. And a lot of the rationale for being in that space was, new IM curriculum, pandemic, PLCs not being able to meet and actually look because they're covering classes. And I had some optimism moving forward for second semester because those things seem to be, the work from the district office to the school building was working on those things. And one learning we had was second semester to Superintendent Smith's comment earlier about knowing each kid by name, knew every kid by name, every black male by name. I went every 2 weeks to the building, and the building could speak to each of our students and where they're at. One of the interesting pieces about this goal is that it's an average of the 2 semesters. So your first semester, one thing that we have a aha on here about and that we've really talked about is first semester needs some love and support. We need to be more at the high school level, need to be more proactive in the summer, which we are doing in reaching out to families and to connecting with teachers and counselors to learn more about our students that are coming in. We've talked about the need for a little bit better assessment or information to know skill gaps and things that students are coming in with. But our PLCs second semester were highly effective in terms of, I think, on average, about 22 to 25%. And most of our schools, we actually had more than half of our schools living above the 25% range. But because of the first semester data, you're not going to move it, right? So it's some of our schools were actually expecting to see a higher number, but that one student ends up getting a B when they needed an A, right? Because they got a C, or they had a D in the first semester and they got an A in the second semester. So they're excited that student's going to meet the goal, and then they don't meet the goal, which is why if you even look at the percentages, they're higher than the 8.9%. So if you take the first semester and the second semester. So we're learning a little bit more about just the importance of how important that first semester was. But our schools and our PLCs and our admin teams were hyper focused during second semester on implementation of the curriculum. And there was a question asked earlier about what's the core reason. And what's so challenging about this is there's multiple, right? So if you got a spreadsheet from these PLCs, you would see them categorized in different areas. Is attendance the main issue? Because if students are failing, they're not going to qualify for this goal, right? And if you look at our attendance data, over 50% or under 50%, 50% under is the participation rate of those students that are failing, right? So that right there is something that you need to address as a school and as a system to find out how we get kids into the door and what that looks like as a system. Is this a new phenomenon at high school, or has attendance always been an issue? That's something that we're working on, working with our feeders on. But once they get in the classroom, the 2 main reasons, right, was attendance based on like tardies, because one thing attendance doesn't capture is students not coming to class on time. But the main thing was the skill gap. So when our students were, or when our teachers were really working on digging, it's a large level of learning to go from a C or a D to an A or a B. Because it's not about the amount of work, it's what you know. And so it is really challenging. And what I'm proud about our staff and our principals is we are collaboratively scoring and ensuring that we maintain that high level for A and Bs, and that we don't let that dip just so that we can try and hit a goal. And so we have to address our math health in our system to reduce the ask on teachers to cover multiple grade levels in a short amount of time with new students that they're just meeting, right? So I just wanted to say, like, there is a lot of intentionality going on in our school buildings at our high school level in terms of PLC and data analysis on a consistent basis. I probably need to do a better job of ensuring that the people that I report to know those on a more consistent basis. So that's something that I can definitely do a better job on. But there's not a day that goes by that my school building administrators and that the teachers in their level couldn't tell you about each individual student.
Hey, Mike, just a follow-up question to that. So I'm going to go back to what Mary shared on those students that enrolled in semester 1, but didn't enroll in semester 2. Do we have a sense of what happened in semester 2? It was too hard, they weren't making the grade. I mean, help me understand sort of how I interpret, being there and then dropping.
So there's multiple reasons for that, okay? It could be that a student was moved to night school based on just having, maybe they failed every class, had a really hard time, and now we're compartmentalizing narrowing their schedule down and working on a couple credits.
Okay.
That's one way that a student might be removed out of that, and they'll take Algebra 1, Semester 1 instead of Semester 2 because they didn't do any of the work. They could have an IEP, and maybe they were put in that class, and then as the class went along, somebody goes, this is not the right placement, could have been an ELL student, this isn't the right placement. IEP team gets together, ELL team gets together, looks at the data, and then moves them into a different course. That's another reason. I don't know if this included just moving out, right? Like, we also have kids that are moving out quite a bit. So I think those are the main reasons that those pieces would happen. Most of our schools are still on the model of trying to keep as many students in semester 2 as possible, but when they don't come at all and don't have any of that semester 1 learning, it's really hard to set them up for that.
Yeah, I was just really asking that question primarily because it sort of gets back to how do we broaden the universe? I mean, if we can keep kids in for both semesters, the likelihood that they'll continue along that path is likely greater, even if they're getting the C. I mean, they're getting the learning, which creates opportunities for them to be thinking much more intentionally, again, about other math that they may not have been thinking about before, so.
I'm fairly confident to say that the students that didn't take it second semester were not successful in first semester.
Okay. Other questions?
Just a clarifying question around, you just mentioned students with IEPs and students that are English learners. Those are students that already have personalized learning plans or IEPs that are we're spending intentional time determining the best placement for them. And we're recommending that this is what we do for other students, but yet we're not placing them in the proper coursework, is what I just heard. Is that accurate? Or we realized that it was not an accurate placement after the first semester. So what will look different for our Black males and their personalized plan that is not currently working with our students with IEPs or our students that are English learners?
I can't speak to the next personalized plan because I think that's the work that we're doing moving forward. But I can tell you that with IEPs and ELL, I think the LEAP was mentioned before as kind of redoing that and relooking at how we're placing students in that work's being done. We've met at least 4 times, and there is a effort being made to, we have a new progress monitoring tool that we'll be using for math. Because I'll be honest with you, our math goals were not helpful. Our math goals were not written in a way that really helped target the support that they needed in those classes. And it really just aligned with Alex, our computer programming. And so this new or I don't even want to call it diagnostics, progress monitoring tool that we are using and they're being trained on is supposed to give us a lot better data. And then in those math intervention blocks for those students that are that have it on their IEP, we'll be getting the more personalized IM work instead of just the computer program work. So that level of support and instruction is going to be much higher than we've had in the past. And just to be honest, the challenge with that, this significant staffing issue that we have right now.
So you talked a lot about failure in your office. Like, thank you for owning that, right? Like, I mean, you talked about that the buck stopped with you and that there were some gaps in the systems that have led us to this point. What were those gaps? Have you identified them, and how are we shoring them up to ensure that we're not having this conversation in a year? What's changing from your vantage point to have a different conversation
Yeah,
next
good
time we
question.
monitor?
Yeah, so two predominant answers. The first is, while we met often as an elementary level team and then separately as a secondary team, we rarely met as a K-12 team. And so in order to implement a K-12 system, you have to meet as a K-12 team to have those common conversations around what we're after, what we're going to see in terms of the progression of learning, how that curriculum is actually going to be implemented, and what we should expect to see from kindergarten to first grade, and then so forth and so on as we get into ninth grade before the algebra skills really begin to take shape and take hold. That's the first thing that's going to have to change. That's already changing.
K-12 leadership team,
It's a,
K-12
well,
math team.
we can call it well, you're naming it right now. So it's kind of a K-12 IM team. We'll go with that because that's I mean, obviously the curriculum is significant in that regard, which includes some universal intervention. The other aspect to your question about what's changing is where and how I spend my time. And so how I spend and where I spend my time has a direct correlation and implication for how the team spends their time. And so if I am engaged in things that's pulling them off the task and the number one goal of improving student outcomes, then that's exactly what will happen. And so how I'm prioritizing how we focus and how we meet and what we meet about and those topics, all of that is changing.
I just have one more kind of general question on page 9. You do Appendix A is about the district interim assessment performance level indicators. And I see we've lowered our percentages in each of the categories, what it means to be advanced, meeting benchmark, progressing, and at risk. Can we just get some context as to that change in percentages? And
That's based on the language in the interim assessments, correct?
Yes, so
It comes directly from the actual assessment of that we're utilizing.
So last year, 2021, we had assessments that were vendor provided and covered multiple topics at once. And then this year we transitioned to the end of unit assessments, and they just cover one topic at a time. And so we're getting this output from Mastery Connect, this auto-scored output that we determine those performance level cut points, and then teachers are also using those assessments as evidence of learning in the grade book. And we discovered that those two things were not aligned. So what might have been a meeting on target and let me make sure I say it right, might have been on target on what was spitting out of Mastery Connect to the assessment platform was actually exceeding target if scored with our SRG practices. So we actually adjusted the scales to make sure that what was spitting out the scoring of Mastery Connect was matching with our SRG scales for our topic scales.
So just a clarification, might be going way off target, but how does this correlate to SRG? Is there a direct correlation?
So we are using an end of unit assessment as like a touch point for our district unit assessment or in district interim assessment for district monitoring. For what, and then we're using that same piece of evidence as student learning. Teachers are inputting that as evidence into the grade book. So we have a end of unit assessment that is, you know, it's a checkpoint for us at the district office, but it's also a checkpoint for the teacher in the grade book. So it's a one assessment that's used two different ways.
Just quickly, is SRG 432, 432? Does it stop at 2, 1?
1.
So is 4 advanced, 3? I mean, is this a direct correlation? So if I'm a student and I get 85% or more correct, I get a 4?
Yeah.
No.
No, because and Taylor can weigh in because
I don't want to go down a
SRG is
rabbit
not
hole,
about
but
percent correct at all.
Yeah.
So we're living one foot in two
Right.
worlds. It's about
So there's a correlation, but not a direct
Yes.
correlation.
yes, it's like a crosswalk, if you will.
But I think maybe the question that Jenna was getting at potentially was that advanced, have we actually, are we lowering what advanced is? Thank you, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think if there's not a direct correlation though
And it's a
to
totally different assessment.
SRG, yes,
Mhm.
then we're not comparing apples to apples. There is a point of integration, but not necessarily full alignment across the two. So you can't compare, right?
And we did also, we changed those cut points, but we also changed the assessments drastically. That's why we did not put them in the same chart. So we didn't just change the cut points. The assessments are totally different assessments. That's why they're not even in the same charts. We have the 2021 assessments. They're in the archived charts on pages, what appendix B starting on page 10. And then the newer assessments are actually in the report.
so we're not lowering our standards and expectations of our students.
We are not.
No.
Thanks.
Everybody clear on that? Okay. Any additional questions on that point?
No, but I just want to say, Mike, I'm so glad that you said that our teachers would not feel any obligation to lower their grades or do anything to hit this goal. I think we just all need to be super real about where we are. So I appreciate you saying that. And I appreciate, you know, our teachers and staff for keeping the standards high. And I think what at least I feel like for myself, my goal is to give resources to hit it, right? So like that's what all of these conversations are hopefully leading up to. How do we get more resources so students reach the goals, not that we are lowering our expectations. So glad you pointed that out, and that's my vantage point from this table.
Any additional board questions?
I have just one that I feel like we're going to regress, and I apologize for that, but I just wanted to, just to make sure that I understand. So on page 3, the group that you have, the student group, looking at Black or African-American males and ELL learners or EL learners. Are ELL students from refugee communities included in the 220? Hold on a second. Where do you count them? Where do they go? Do they stay in the ELL group, or are they part of the Black African or African American group?
Do you know what I'm saying? Am I making myself clear? Do I need to say it in
Are they
Spanish maybe?
reflected only one place or are they reflected?
Yes,
two
correct.
places?
Thank you.
They're
Where do they,
reflected in both.
where are they counted?
Both, or as, and they could be in the free or reduced price meals as well. So we could have a student intersect in many different student groups.
Okay. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Anything else from the board? So Kim, you're going to ask the final question? And that is?
What can the board do?
Thank you.
I thought about this, because I think the last time you asked that question, I said, let me think about that. So here's what my thought process is, and I'll certainly open that up to the team as well. I think a couple different places. The first is, I do want to thank you for the conversation tonight. I think you're pressing on all the right challenges and all the right questions that we need to be asking of ourselves and of one another. So I would encourage you to continue to do that. Two other areas. One is in terms of funding, we're going to be moving some dollars based on data that we've got and where we have students being served. And so you're likely to see some changes and hear about some of those changes in terms of where the dollars are being moved to. And so I think as I give you those reports on those weekly memos, you being aware of where those dollars are going and why they're going to the places that they're being allocated to, it will be important for you to know to be able to answer those questions. And so, and I think just your continued advocacy and support in that regard is going to be helpful. The other aspect of this too, I think, is our continued collective support at the State House around universal pre-K and continuing to offer that as a major priority for this district. That's where those foundational skills begin and the opportunities to create those unique experiences for students. It all starts in pre-K, and and so being able to provide that that level of advocacy for our students and for our families and with them is going to be important for us moving forward. And I know it feels a little bit maybe premature to talk about pre-K, universal pre-K, and a ninth grade algebra report. But we talk about building a system and building a system that is comprehensive and that is forward moving. Universal pre-K it begins there.
I really appreciate the thoughtfulness around how our financial resources are applied specifically to our board goals. I think we struggled with that mightily when we went through our budget discussions this year. So an opportunity to sort of recalibrate and address how funds are being used to support our board goals, I think is consistent with at least what I would like to see. So I appreciate that. Any other comments?
When will you know how our pre-K enrollment is shaping up? Like, when will you know that?
It's already underway.
Yeah, here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Although we still have people coming in as early as September 30th
Yeah,
for the
we do.
October 1 cutoff, so. Yeah, great. AJ, any thoughts before we adjourn?
Yes, ma'am. Two. There was an exchange between Jenna and Matt that's worth reflecting on. She asked, how will you, something to the effect of, how will you know that whether or not things are being implemented so that we don't have this conversation again next year? And part of Matt's response was that he's putting in place certain progress monitoring systems so that he'll have insight as a chief executive. But then he said something else that I think is particularly instructive for the board. He said, I'm also going to have to modify how I spend my time, that the more energy I focus in on these goals, the more energy my team will. And if I'm pulling them in a bunch of different directions, then they're never going to have the time to really dial in to make sure that these things happen. Truer words were never spoken. If the chief executive focuses on things, the chief executive's team will focus on things. However, the chief executive is only able to focus on certain things in so much as his supervisor, the board, allows for that. And so I would just identify a board as when Kim asked the question, what can the board be doing? the more things that you pull him toward, the less time he will spend pulling his team toward these specific goals. And so that's just something, there's always a cost benefit analysis that the board needs to do when deciding, is this important enough to task the superintendent with, or do we want him to focus in on accomplishing these goals? So that exchange was really just really spot on, and appreciate both participants. The second comment that I would add is your superintendent just said that it may be strange to be talking about pre-K in a 9th grade monitoring report. I don't find it strange at all. There's a district that I've had the pleasure of working with here in Texas that the board set as a goal that they wanted more than 90% of their students to graduate high school with an associate's degree. And it took them, I want to say, 8 years of implementation, and then they got there. It was the first time that they had more than 90% of their students graduate with an associate's degree, and then they just continue to maintain that and grow that. And right now, they're sitting at 100% of their students graduate with either an associate's degree or an industry certification, with many of them graduating with both. The reason I mention this story is because when I visited with the superintendent to say what was a necessary precondition of getting students to graduate high school with their associate's degrees, without hesitation, he said, if we didn't redesign the pre-K experience, if we didn't back map from the assumption of a associate's degree at the end of the 12th grade, and then use that to backwards design all the way to a completely overhauled pre-K programming, we could have never pulled this off. And so I always found that instructive. And so I appreciate the superintendent surfacing that this is a pre-K-12 phenomenon to work on, not merely a 9th grade phenomenon to work on. Madam Vice Chair, those are my reflections.
Thank you, AJ. Appreciate it. If there aren't any other comments or questions, our work session will conclude, and we are definitely adjourned now. Thanks.